Vaccines are now being mandated for businesses with more than 100 employees. This is going to affect 80 million American people. Is this an intrusion on your rights? Do you trust your government to have that amount of authority? Are these necessary measures, or is this situation being mobilized for political ends? Now, as ever, when talking about this subject, it's necessary for me to express my neutrality. I am Switzerland when it comes to this subject. No view at all. I am merely a floating series of molecules, spores in space that, through the spike protein, could attach to something. Now, I'm completely neutral. Let's see what this New York Times journalist, Robbie Sove, had to say. In December 2020, the prospect of imminent mass vaccination against COVID-19 was becoming a reality, and Biden said he would not force anyone to get the jab. No, I don't think it should be mandatory, he told reporters. I wouldn't demand it be mandatory. So Biden, however you see Biden, and increasingly post-Afghan war withdrawal situation, he is receiving a little more criticism even from his traditional supporters, is changing. We're seeing that ordinary process, campaign promises, what takes place in action. You know what my position is. This is an area where I can declare what I feel. I'm neither left nor right because I don't believe in centralised bipartisan democracy. So I'm not a socialist or a Marxist. I agree with kindness, compassion, sharing, service, supporting one another, and I can talk about the administrative underwriting of those emotions, because all governmental systems are ultimately leaning into an emotion somewhere along the line. They have to, because otherwise, what is humanitarianism? Why protect human beings at all? Why is it important that there's something such as equality? Or as George Carlin would say, what are rights? Where did you get rights from? God, here we go again, to quote the great man. Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, recently reiterated Biden's position. That's not the role of federal government, she declared in July, referring to the idea of a government mandate. Rochelle Walensky, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, said the same thing. A week later, there will be no nationwide mandate. Now there is a mandate. Any business that employs more than 100 people will necessarily have to mandate their employees to be vaccinated. I've seen a lot of people say that this feels like an infringement on their bodily rights. I think whatever you feel about the vaccine issue, whether you think the vaccines are effective, whether you feel there are treatments or aren't treatments, wherever you fall in this issue, the idea of mandating something, that's authoritarianism. That's what that is. That's telling people they have to do stuff. That's giving the government more and more power. I think that it's pretty significant and serious around this issue, even though I would never tell anybody what they should do with their own body. That's my personal perspective. And I am fearful of government having more power. For me, big business, mass media, big pharma, government, and the relationships between these entities, this has always been the nexus of the problem since I've been doing videos. Go look back at what videos I was making 8 years ago. Go check them. This has always been my concern. When people think you're a person of the left, what I think they mean by that is that I care about vulnerable people. I agree with people no matter what their background, being able to be who they are. But what I would extend that to all people, no matter what class you are, no matter what race you are, no matter how you identify, on all possible iterations of that. Whatever this spectrum is, I think it's a fake spectrum anyway, is the truth of what I believe. I believe that we have more in common with each other than what divides us. Have a look at who dominates the decision-making processes regardless of who's in government. Why do you think it is that certain things are pledged in campaigns that never are instantiated in government? Because they aren't in alignment with the centralised deep state forces which are present. It's not a conspiracy, it's a conspiracy fact. On Thursday, Biden announced far-reaching vaccine mandates that applies to most federal workers, hospitals, public schools and 80 million employees of private companies. Under the White House's presumptuous plan, workplaces that employ more than 100 must require their employees to either get vaccinated or submit to weekly testing, a burden so onerous that for many businesses it will not be a choice at all. Forcing vaccines on a minority contingent of unwilling people risks shredding the social fabric of a country already being pulled apart by political tribalism. I wonder if this is kind of deliberate in some way, creating this kind of maelstrom of conflict, because It's obvious it's going to cause a problem. It's obvious it's going to cause a problem. We've looked at the data and seen the kind of people most likely to be reluctant to get a vaccine in a sort of apparently liberal state like New York, who are mandating vaccines in like lots of public spaces. You know what communities are most affected, and it's at odds with what that party and that set of ideals purports to represent. The interests of, I don't know, minority or vulnerable, or I don't know how you want to frame that anymore. But for me, it seems that this issue is being used to create more and more conflict, confusion, agitation. And one thing it certainly does is it prevents us from looking at what's happening, this big wealth transfer that's taken place during this pandemic. It seems to me like a very, very unusual time, a time that is really important to remain awake. The president should not, and mostly likely does not, have the power to unilaterally compel millions of private sector workers to get vaccinated or risk losing their jobs. That's interesting that it might be unconstitutional and impossible. So that means that possibly this is a rhetorical display, and what's desired is that on hearing this stuff, loads of businesses start imposing these mandates privately, autonomously, relieving the government of the necessity. If you can get people to police themselves, you don't have to police them. Biden is presiding over a vast expansion of federal authority, one that the Democrats will certainly come to regret the next time a Republican takes power. Moreover, the mechanism of enforcement, a presidential decree smuggled into law by the Department of Labor and its Occupational Safety and Health Administration, is fundamentally undemocratic. Congress is supposed to make new laws, not an unaccountable bureaucratic agency. In a sense, I'm beginning to realise more and more that the process of government is one of theatre, that the interests of the powerful are never meaningfully interrupted. It's impossible to do it. That even a kind of peculiar anomaly like Trump, whatever you think of him, ultimately fell in line with the agenda of pre-existing power structures. And even if you think that Trump was unfairly deposed, nothing really changed. So if you were vehemently anti-Trump or vehemently pro-Trump, what really changed? The most anti-vaccine Americans will probably not change their minds because the government is strong-arming employers. On the contrary, the federal mandate might actually be taken as confirmation of their suspicions that the vaccines have less to do with their health and more to do with social control. I suppose that's the fundamental argument, that many people are suspicious about the role of government. Many people are suspicious about the intentions of government. Not many people look at the government and think, oh, there they are, the government, our mates. Do you remember when Biden got elected and like some news pundits were going, oh, look at the lights around that pond thing that's out the front of the White House. It's like Joe Biden's electric light arms reaching out and cuddling the nation as a new father. How many people actually feel like that now, like that you're dealing with George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or some de facto patriarch who don't see the government primarily as an agency for the interests of already powerful institutions and economic entities? Who's like, hey, the government, who is that? Who thinks that? Other than the media and other... I don't ever meet anyone, do you? It's like, oh, the government, they're a bunch of lolly lads, aren't they? Go on, government, give us a cuddle with your big electric light arms. As a practical matter, it's undeniable that the federal mandate will engender a titanic backlash and create a spate of lawsuits. Vaccine holdouts have already taken legal action against employers requiring vaccination. Todd Zwicky, a law professor at George Mason University of Virginia, who had recovered from COVID and has antibodies, recently fought his institution's mandate and prevailed. And Republican governors are certain to battle Mr. Biden over this policy, particularly if there's a precedent, particularly if it is sufficient to have antibodies. This oughtn't be a matter for hysteria. The time for hysteria has passed. The beginning, when it's like, oh my God, what's going on? There's this virus, everything's got to change. Lockdowns, everyone went along with it, didn't they? All patriotically. Weren't we all just baking stuff and people singing on their balconies and everyone was all like, okay, we've got to do this. This is our Third World War. This is our Second World War. Well, that's not where we are anymore. So trying to sustain a state of hysteria, I think, is unfair and manipulative. What should take place is a judicious series of decisions based on principles of freedom, the very principles that countries like the United States of America are founded upon. You're going to have to take that word out of the Constitution if you're not willing to live by its values. It's true that courts have upheld vaccine mandates in certain circumstances. In 1922, the Supreme Court famously ruled that a city ordinance could deny admission to students who failed to get the smallpox vaccine. But I bet what was going on was there was a smallpox vaccine. The vaccine was highly effective in preventing people getting smallpox. And it was like, listen, you can't come here spreading smallpox around. But if you look at some of the data and statistics around this pandemic, you would have to ask if it's comparable to that precedented case. You have to consider the various factors and perspectives on this complex issue. That's why I do it. I just look around considering perspectives, just floating around, all free. But the assertion that a public official can completely sidestep the legislative process and enact much farther-reaching vaccine mandates via administrative action should elicit scepticism, even from those who vigorously support vaccination. Wouldn't that be lovely if you could get people, like off Breaking Points, you know, the dude there, like who's like, I've had them vaccines, I'm into vaccines, I love them, but you can't go around telling people what to do. You can't suppress information. I enjoy his perspective on that. The more transmissible Delta variant spooked federal health officials and some municipalities, including Washington, then reimposed mask mandates, even though the science hasn't actually changed. If the government is concerned about vaccine hesitancy, it should trust the vaccines and drop other restrictions. Instead, the White House is sending the message that people must get vaccinated, but should hardly expect things to be different afterwards. That's interesting, isn't it? If you're mandating something, it must be because it's important, it's effective, it's fundamental, it's pivotal. If it doesn't make a difference, why do it? It's worth repeating that the federal vaccine mandate represents a broad expansion of the executive's branch power, and Mr. Biden will not be the chief executive forever. Is this really the time to solidify the idea that the president is the ultimate authority on whether such things should be required or forbidden? I admire the manner in which Robbie Sove has written this article, because it's obviously an invitation to people that are supporters of Biden and obviously, I presume at least, the Democratic Party to say, hold on a minute, if you start putting these changes in place, what if Trump does stand in 2024, who you dudes all like to vilify and stuff? He'll have all this power. You know, you want to feel like the media and that the government have a degree of transparency, that you can trust them. Not that it's like, oh, it's our guy now, so this is good. Oh, it's their guy, oh, that's bad. You know, like, what is the point of government? Isn't the government to make America or Britain or France or Australia or Senegal or wherever as good as possible? A free place where human beings feel safe and loved and able to be who they actually are. If it's some mad game about power and getting across your opinion and getting across your point and suppressing other people's perspectives, then what's the point in trusting any of them? Why not simply separate yourself from them? Set up your own entities. Say, we don't want to participate anymore in what you call your centralised democracy. We want true democracy. We're not paying your taxes. We're going to run our own little confederacy of nations, autonomously and democratically, that will be free to decide on their own creeds within each autonomous unit, broadly agreeing on a set of principles as yet to be decided. And what should those principles be? Stick them in the comments. Let me know how you'd like to have found a new nation, an adjacent nation. Once the beast is slain, slay the beast. Adjacent nations will be required. Stick down there in the comments below what you want to say. And subscribe to my channel and give this video a like and pass it around. And if you enjoyed this video, why not have a look at this one? And if you want to meditate now and learn more about well-being, have a look at this one and subscribe to that, my Awakening channel. You will love it. And sign up to my mailing list at russellbrand.com. Stay free.